Major funding for this program has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional funding has been provided by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
How the conflagration began, no one could be certain. Some said it started in a nearby house. Others claimed a spark, borne by the wind, ignited rotted timbers in the roof. Whatever the cause, the skies over Beaulieu were soon filled with the acrid smell of death as fire consumed the proud cathedral. Fanned by strong winds, the flames leapt heavenward, as if mocking the sacred structure they destroyed. Huge rafters snapped like twigs, blazing beams fell, stones split, and molten lead cascaded down like water. The people gathered outside and mourned the victims, who included young Pierre. He had come to them only 2 weeks before to enter the church school, and they mourned as well for the loss of their most cherished relic, the veil of the Virgin, one of the holiest objects in Christendom. What had they done to cause God to punish them so? Suddenly, out of the ruins of the choir, a slight movement caught every eye. A gasp was heard as the unmistakable form of Pierre emerged from the crypt, and in his hands, incredibly, the veil. A miracle, the people proclaimed. You have saved the holy relic. No, Pierre replied. It has saved me. Awestruck by this sign of divine power, the people of Beaulieu committed themselves to the building of a new cathedral, larger and more inspiring than any in the land, a fitting palace for the kingdom of God on earth. In commemoration of his role, Bishop Philippe honored Pierre by making him chronicler of the building of Notre-Dame de Beaulieu. It was the first day of May in the year of our Lord, 1214. These are the fields of northern France, in many ways unchanged since the Middle Ages. Imagine with me living in France 700 years ago and setting off on a pilgrimage to perhaps the most famous place of worship in the world, Chartres Cathedral. All day long it draws you toward it, growing larger and larger, still looming in the distance like a vision. Overcome with emotion, you are certain that this must be the most splendid place on earth. This must truly be the palace of God. Just as it must have been in the 12th century, Chartres remains an incredible sight. Chartres was built by people very similar to those of Beaulieu, and although the story of Beaulieu is made up, it is based on many of the cathedrals we'll be seeing. Even to our modern eyes, which have seen towering skyscrapers, indoor stadiums, jumbo jets, and space shuttles, the Gothic cathedrals still inspire awe. There's no other word for it. They are so enormous and so obviously dangerous and expensive to construct that we have to ask, how were they built?
Yes, and why? Because though they are marvels of engineering, that alone doesn't tell us the story about Gothic cathedrals. One of the things that makes them different from castles and pyramids and ancient Roman cities is that after 700 years, the great Gothic cathedrals are still in use.
And for their original purpose.
Cathedrals have always functioned as parish churches for local inhabitants. But they were also much more. The word cathedral comes from the Latin cathedra, meaning the throne of the bishop. And most cathedrals are still the bishop's churches, the administrative centers of their diocese, and the spiritual centers for entire regions. Places large enough to hold the many thousands who still visit them every year.
Aside from being a spiritual center, the cathedral became the focus of city life. Not only did it symbolize prosperity and civic pride, it also served as a magnet for trade and commerce. Its images found their way onto stained glass, coins, seals, and all manner of medieval souvenirs, much like today.
If you lived in the Middle Ages, almost since birth you would have been taught that God was the most important force in your life, and that everything around you, the change of seasons, the sun and the rain, the sowing and reaping of your crops, even war and famine and untimely death, all of this was merely the working out of God's plan. Heaven and hell were real, just as real and literal as the wind and the cold, the fields and the animals. Religious faith was the dominant motivating factor behind everything. The church brought you into the world, and it took you out of this world and into the next. Between baptism and last rites, you depended upon the church for education and religious instruction, for confession, absolution, and communion, for keeping legal documents such as wills and marriage contracts, and for help and support when you needed it. Down through the centuries, the cathedrals are where people have celebrated their own lives and remembered the lives of others. And the building of each cathedral was a saga of struggle and ingenuity, of heroes and villains, bishops and kings, and people who in many ways were like each of us.
No one knew from where the money for the new cathedral would come, but Bishop Philippe assured us that God and the good people of Beaulieu would provide. As always, he was correct. When, in 1215, His Grace returned from the Lateran Council in Rome, he greeted the chapter with a glorious report.
His Holiness looks with such favour upon this endeavour that he has given us this magnificent jewelled reliquary for the sacred veil. And now, if the Pope himself takes such an active interest, my friends, it certainly behoves us to do our share.
The bishop has always taught by personal example.
Our cathedral will bear Our Lady's name and must therefore do her the most fitting honour we are capable of. As my own contribution, I hereby pledge half the revenues from my lands in Picardy for 5 years.
Not to be outdone, the chapter pledged half its own revenues from land in the diocese for 6 years. The next order of business was the hiring of a master builder. Many were considered. The chapter finally selected Guillaume de Senlis, who had worked on several cathedrals already.
Master Guillaume must build us the tallest, widest, most splendid cathedral in all of France.
Let us guard against the sin of pride.
Oh, all for the glory of God, of course.
Of course.
Soon the town was abuzz with activity. Rubble was cleared from the area of the old church, workshops were set up, even a few old houses were moved. Master Guillaume immediately set to work laying out the site.
The floor plan, Your Grace, will naturally be in the shape of the cross. At the head, and facing east, the choir area, and 5 chapels where the faithful may pray for the souls of their forebears.
And their quick deliverance from the flames of purgatory.
A wide ambulatory around the choir meets the side aisles to provide easy movement, even during crowded services. The crypt of the old cathedral remains intact beneath the floor. The transept will have elegant, sculpted doorways on both north and south sides. One altar will be here, and another at the crossing for Holy Day services. Your nave will easily hold the thousands who will come on such occasions, and what they will see is a building of unmatched beauty, a single, unified expression of God's hand in nature.
I'm sure the Blessed Virgin will be pleased and impressed.
The nave and choir will rise nearly twice as high as those of the old cathedral, with a vaulted ceiling of stone, not wood.
That should lessen the danger of fire.
This new building style allows the walls to contain vast expanses of glass, letting in the light of divine essence. Your Grace finds so inspiring.
But twice the height of the old cathedral? Heavy stone ceilings? Walls of glass? Master Guillaume, it cannot possibly stand.
Oh, it will stand. And as we build it, you will see how.
This new style of building must truly be inspired by God.
As are all things, Pierre.
As soon as Master Guillaume placed his final stake, the workers began digging the foundation. On April the 14th, 1216, His Grace blessed the first stone.
The foundation is most critical. It must be both strong and even to support such great weight. It goes down 25 feet into the ground. You see there? The mason is carefully checking each layer of stones with his plumb line. Any mistake in leveling, and the entire structure could collapse.
Heaven forfend!
We are fortunate in having a quarry close by, so we can float the stones downriver on barges to the town docks.
I am impressed with your thorough organization.
His Grace always says that God is in the details.
Thank you, Pierre.
I only hope the supply of stone holds out.
Our cathedral is being built to honor the Virgin and house the sacred veil, to whose miraculous powers I can personally attest. So His Grace decided that a public display of the relic throughout the countryside would encourage the generosity of all toward the building fund. One who needs no such prodding is the merchant, Thibault le Riche. As a young man, he journeyed to Italy to ply his skills as a weaver and returned as a trader of fine Italian cloth.
As always, Merchant Thibault, your contribution is most welcome. I am certain Our Lady will smile upon you.
She always has. It is only fitting that I show her thanks for my successes.
So much progress has been seen these past several years. But Master Guillaume's design is still a mystery to me. It seems he is building no walls at all. It will be inspiring to worship in such an atmosphere. I only wonder what will keep it all from crashing down upon our heads. But Bishop Philippe has seen the new building style in Paris and has faith in Master Guillaume. Ingenious.
God will reward your most noble work.
But will he also find me enough stone? I've told the Dean supplies in the quarry are waning already.
God always provides.
Thank you, Pierre.
Every season brings new wonders. I am now Father Pierre. Master Guillaume throws himself into the completion of the choir with fervor incredible to behold. Who would have expected such progress in less than 20 years? With the roof and vaulting finished, His Grace has established July the 2nd, 1233, the feast day of the Visitation of the Blessed Virgin, for the dedication of the choir. The entire town is at a pitch of excitement. As it now happens, the celebration will not be one of unbridled joy. As the plans were underway, it pleased God to call back to his mercy his faithful servant Philippe. With his dying breath, his grace charged us to move forward, but our grief knows no bounds. Our new bishop, Gervais, is from a wealthy and prominent family. We hope he will prove as great an inspiration as Philippe. With neighboring bishops and the Archbishop of Reims, he presided over the dedication of the choir. We hope the cathedral will help guide people along the one true path to God. Bishop Philippe was entombed among the past bishops and the sacred remains of Saint Etienne de Beaulieu. And it is only fitting. Were it not for his grace, this cathedral, now nearly half complete, would still be no more than a dream.
We're in the Royal Abbey Church of Saint-Denis, just a few miles from the center of Paris. This is the royal burial place of French kings and one of the most important religious centers in all of France. This is also where the Gothic style began. Saint-Denis was the passion of its greatest abbot, Suger, who was born in 1081 and became one of the most influential clerics and statesmen of his time. It was his dream to build a church where worshippers could actually feel the presence of God. And to Suger, God's presence meant light. Here in the choir of Saint-Denis, Suger brought God's light into the church. Suger didn't invent the stained glass window. He simply used it on a scale previously unknown. This entire area is virtually enclosed by a beautiful curtain of glass. The choir, the ambulatory passage which allowed movement around the choir, these elegant radiating chapels are all part of Suger's vision. And this unity of design and structure became the essence of Gothic architecture. Compare Saint-Denis to the Romanesque churches of the time. We see heavy, castle-like structures with small windows and massive walls. Next to these buildings, Suger's church, with its delicate, light, glass-filled walls, must have seemed a miracle. For as Pierre asked, how could such a building be supported by walls of glass? Well, the answer is, it couldn't. What traditionally supports a roof and ceiling are walls. In the earliest churches, these walls gradually evolved into a series of arches and load-bearing columns called piers. As wooden ceilings were replaced by more permanent, fireproof, and significantly heavier stone ceilings called vaults, the walls had to be thicker to support the increased weight and resist the outward thrust. The windows remained quite small. In later buildings, the downward weight and outward thrust of the vaulting was concentrated at a number of specific points. By making the arches wider and the piers heavier, more of the wall space could be opened up for windows. As church buildings grew taller and closer to the heavens, the weight of the vaulting inside and the force of the wind outside increased. At some point, the piers would have become so huge that the space between them would have become virtually unusable. So, to reduce the size of the main piers and to effectively resist the force of the wind, additional support, placed out of the interior space, was needed. The result was a row of buttresses, connected to the high walls by stone arms, called flying buttresses. We're up among the flying buttresses at Amiens, one of the tallest cathedrals in the world. The thrust of the interior vaulting pushes against the wall high above each of the main piers. It then passes through the wall, travels across the flying buttress, and is channeled through the main buttress into the foundations below. The result of this is a wide, unobstructed aisle below me and this magnificent wall of glass behind me. Initially, Gothic builders weren't entirely sure about their new breakthrough. Chartres, one of the first of the giant cathedrals, was begun in 1194. It has massive buttresses, each weighing over 2 million pounds. The flying buttresses, on the other hand, are rather timid. The builders of Chartres were taking no chances. At Bourges, built almost as early as Chartres, we see long, delicate flying buttresses that much more gracefully support a building of comparable size. Far less light is blocked by structure. Each buttress weighs only a third as much as those at Chartres, an important factor not only in the appearance of the building, but also in its cost.
Moving stone from great distances, hauling it to the site, and then lifting it to these extraordinary heights meant that economy in design was essential. It was possible, however, to take that economy a little too far.
In 1284, there was a collapse at the just completed cathedral at Beauvais, after the nave had reached a height of 150 feet. The transept and choir are all that remain.
But for the most part, the medieval builder was extremely careful and knowledgeable. He used his own building as a model, checking each part as it was finished. An example of the builder's knowledge is to be found in the use of ornate stone pinnacles like these here at Amiens. For centuries, people thought they were merely decorative, but as it turns out, their weight helps the buttresses to do their jobs more effectively.
The cathedral was meant to be a physical representation of the divine order of things, a microcosm of a universe fashioned by God, the ultimate master builder. Nowhere is this better seen than in the perfect proportions of the west facade of Notre Dame in Paris. In all its magnificence, Notre Dame was a fitting symbol for an influential and flourishing city, the intellectual center of the medieval world.
The order and imposing presence of this building also echoed the harmony and stability which in the 12th century began to spread throughout the entire country. By the 13th century, the alliance of a powerful monarchy working hand in glove with an equally powerful clergy had helped to bring peace, prosperity, and learning to all of France. Notre Dame came to symbolize an entire age.
Every day there is new progress. Master Guillaume works himself at a furious pace, yet says he could move faster still.
Oh, Pierre, I am continually slowed by the lack of materials. If the bishop wants his cathedral finished in our lifetime...
Master Guillaume is always complaining. Does he think money simply materializes out of thin air?
With due respect, Your Grace, perhaps if you would set an example by donating some of your revenues, as did Bishop Philippe, according to the traditional formula...
That is no concern of the chapter.
I would be telling an untruth if I said that relations between the chapter and the bishop were warm and cordial. But God in his wisdom has sent Gervais for a reason, and it is not mine to question. Still, I would be telling an untruth if I said that he is not sometimes a trial.
Father Pierre!
Becoming, Your Grace. Now that the choir is completed and the transept well underway, more pilgrims than ever journey to Beaulieu to venerate the sacred veil and appeal to its miraculous powers of healing. This also has been good for the businesses of the town and has brought more traders. When they come to deal with Merchant Thibault, he takes them first to the chapel he endowed, in which he takes understandable pride. He has spent many hours observing all the building processes and impresses his friends with his knowledge.
They make the glass from the ash of the beechwood and the washed sand, and they melt them together. While it is still molten, they add metals and sometimes old glass for coloring. The glassmaker scoops up a ball of it on the end of a pipe and blows it into a large sphere. This he moves to the end of an iron rod called a punty, on which the glass is spun rapidly over the heat. The hole, from when it is taken off the rod, grows bigger and bigger until the sphere becomes a large, flat dish. The masons who cut the stone tracery are of the highest skill. They make over this rigid rock into these delicate forms.
Good morning to you, Merchant Thibault.
And to you too, sir, and madame. That is the Countess de Bouvier. Very wealthy. She raised all the money for the rose window.
Countess, your window already enhances the entire building.
32 feet across, containing thousands of pieces of glass. But perhaps you can use your influence with the bishop. I now have tracery lying on the ground and no walls to place it in. Some of my masons have nothing to do.
In November, as in every previous year, the finished stonework is covered over with straw and dung to prevent freezing and cracking. Most of the workers return home for the winter. Our Lord said the poor would always be with us, and their need is all the greater in winter. At least they have some shelter now in the hostel established by the mendicant followers of St. Francis of Assisi, who have renounced all their worldly possessions so they can better serve the needy. Their leader is Friar Roland.
Bishop Gervais could better honor his high office by devoting greater time and energy to the poor, as we humble friars do. There is great discontent in the town, my friend. I have heard it with my own ears. They say this bishop is more apt to fleece his flock than to feed it. He has certainly not followed the dictum to divide his property into fourths. Or, if he has, the fourth he spends upon himself is far larger than the fourth he spends upon the poor.
I would be telling an untruth if I said there was no grumbling in the chapter either. Only last week I overheard the dean.
The evidence is clear. His Grace is taking much more money for his personal use than is prudent or acceptable. He lives in a far finer manner than Bishop Philippe before him. This has lowered our treasury and depleted the building fund at a crucial stage. Something must be done.
I propose we send a letter to the Pope.
The discontent must have reached his Grace's ears, because shortly thereafter he met with Master Guillaume on the matter of the stone.
And this quarry will provide you with all the stone you require.
I have seen and tested that stone. It is not all of good quality.
And I tell you it is.
Is His Grace now a stonemason as well as a bishop? Need he also tell me the quarry rests upon his own family's lands?
I wish to hear no more complaining. You will use the stone and finish quickly. A magnificent cathedral will increase our prosperity and importance as a town.
And his own prosperity and importance in the eyes of the king.
As the walls near completion, the portals are adorned with the finest sculpture I have yet seen. Master Guillaume has brought in the most skilled sculptors in the land.
I tell you, it is not a simple task keeping all the artists working in the same style. But the masters have much experience and keep a tight rein on their assistants.
A most impressive rendering, Master Guillaume.
But the real masterpiece will be the Last Judgment on the western end. Look at these drawings.
By the 8th day of June, 1245, the transept and north and south porches were complete. Instead of working, everyone attended the annual Pentecost celebration and fair. Bishop Gervais even exchanged pleasant greetings with the dean, the chapter, and Master Guillaume. It was just like old times.
The Gothic cathedral was a kind of miracle, the tangible result of 2 centuries of economic growth and prosperity, especially in the cities. By the 13th century, the cities became magnets for farmers bringing their new surpluses, for traders eager to buy and sell, and for a new international merchant class who worked from warehouses and docks along the waterways, like this one here at Amiens. The medieval city provided excitement, opportunity, and freedom. As the cities grew, they competed with each other for trade and business, just as cities do today. International traders, cloth merchants and grain dealers mingled with the faithful outside the house of God. One of the things that attracted people and encouraged them to come from far away, bringing their money with them, was the relics. In most cases, the greater the cathedral, the greater and more powerful the relics it contained. This is said to be the head of St. John the Baptist, kept among the treasures at Amiens. It was brought back to France by the Crusaders, who scoured the Holy Land for relics such as this. The relics and the miracles they could produce were considered so important in the Middle Ages that King Louis IX paid a fortune for what he believed to be Christ's authentic crown of thorns. There is more than a little dispute about whether it actually was. There were several crowns of thorns making their way through Europe at that time, all equally well authenticated. So there was a strong connection between a cathedral's drawing power and its town's wealth, a definite link between business and religion. For example, the town docks at Amiens were jointly owned by the merchants and the cathedral chapter. A town's relation to its bishop could often be strained. In 1112, the citizens here in Laon were so unhappy with their cruel and cynical Bishop Gaudry that they bought a communal charter from the king to separate themselves from him. When Gaudry got back to town, he paid the king even more to annul the charter, leading to considerable unrest. Gaudry's soldiers murdered the leader of the townsmen in cold blood. So the outraged citizens marched right into this palace, dragged the bishop out, cut his head off, and set fire to the cathedral and to the palace. The new bishop had to send the local relics on tour twice, just to pay for repairs. Financing a cathedral was hardly ever an easy task, even in the pious Middle Ages. 100 years after Laon, the people of Reims rose in bloody revolt against heavy taxation and halted construction for years. In fact, peasants all over France who could least afford it were often made to bear the heaviest financial burden. Construction taxes forced many peasants to borrow from city merchants and moneylenders, who themselves would profit handsomely again once the cathedral was completed. Ironically, the local parish churches sometimes suffered most of all, as they had to stop their own building projects and repairs and pledge large sums of money to the cathedral fund. Each cathedral had its own story, and there was a darker side to many of them, including, as we'll see, Beaulieu.
We live in an age of wonders. Every day I thank God that in our time He has revealed His science to us so we could glorify Him with our cathedral. Master Guillaume himself is a wonder. Though the years hang heavy on his shoulders, his zeal is that of a child. Yesterday he explained the roofing process to a new group of apprentices, as if for the first time.
The roof will be a series of triangular trusses which the carpenters will first assemble on the ground. After this test, they will dismantle and hoist each one to the top of the walls, where they will be reassembled. The trusses and the beams connecting them are secured with strong oak pegs.
This is not work for the timid.
Once the beams are in place, we can erect a windlass to hoist the rest of the timber and help in setting up the trusses. In the meantime, the roofers will be casting lead sheets to cover the wooden frame. They will also cast the drain pipes and gutters. Water will be directed through the lead pipes and channels down and away from the roof and out of the mouths of the gargoyles.
That should prove a chastening sight for the wicked, showing the spirits of hell awaiting the unrepentant.
With the roof and gutters in place, we will have the protection we need to begin the vaulting. The stone, mortar and heavy materials will be raised by means of the great wheel. First, temporary wooden centerings will be mounted on the scaffolding. Then, the cut stones of the ribs, the voussoirs, will be hoisted onto the centering and mortared by the masons. Then, they can insert the keystone and lock the ribs together at the crown. These ribs become a frame for the construction of the vault itself. The vaulting is made up of webbing, layers of lightweight stone mortared together. Initially, it will be held in place by wood lagging underneath. Once the mortar has set, a 4-inch layer of concrete will be poured over the entire vault to help stabilize it. Only when it is set can the lagging and centering be removed, and we proceed to the next bay.
Too advanced in age to climb to the roof any longer, Master Guillaume supervised the operation from the ground. His assistant, Robert de Cormont, urged him to rest, but Guillaume would have none of it.
Robert! You do not go to bed when you are halfway up the mountain.
That moment will be forever engraved in my memory.
Quick! Over there!
Master Guillaume! He is dead. Lord have mercy. All work ceased after the wall collapse, and the following day, Master Guillaume de Senlis was laid to rest in the transept. As he did for Bishop Philippe, His Grace spoke glowing words for Master Guillaume.
Would that he had been half so kind to Master Guillaume while he was yet alive.
Immediately after the service, Robert began a meticulous investigation into the cause of the collapse. He delivered his report 5 weeks later to the assembled chapter.
The stone was weak and ill-suited to the purpose, just as Master Guillaume predicted. The stone from the quarry of the bishop.
And I now have proof that Bishop Gervais has been diverting funds pledged to the cathedral building to his own personal use.
Something must be done.
There was no turning back. I was charged to write a letter to King Louis himself. Within a month, the king arrived in Beaulieu with the announced intention of touring the cathedral. But that evening, he met in private with the chapter and the dean. And I would be telling an untruth if I denied that there was much relief in the chapter and town when word came that His Majesty summoned His Grace to fulfill a vow he had taken many years before to go on a crusade. He was buried in North Africa. God rest his soul. Upon the departure of the bishop, an accounting was conducted of his holdings.
There is no money left. Construction cannot resume.
These are dark days for us. The cathedral stands uncompleted. The sheds of the masons and carpenters are empty. Neighboring towns prosper at our expense. Only a miracle can help us now. And I fear I may not see it.
This is the tombstone of Ully Berger, the architect and master builder of Saint-Nicaise here in Reims. He's holding a model of the church, and around him are the implements he used in overseeing its construction: a measuring stick, a pair of calipers, and a square. These were just about the only tools a medieval builder like our Guillaume de Senlis would have had to supervise the building of a structure like this. What he lacked in technology, the medieval builder had to make up in ingenuity and personal skill. Not only did he have to be able to read and write, but he also needed a keen understanding of applied geometry, substantial knowledge of the existing buildings of his time,
And as if this weren't enough, he also had to be able to manage the multitude of workers required for such an undertaking. There were as many as 50 individual sculptors working at Amiens, and considerably more than that here at Reims. The organization and planning must have been nothing less than incredible. The most important craftsmen were the stonemasons. They were divided into the rough masons who cut, mortared, and laid the heavy stone, and the freemasons who carved and laid the more intricate stonework, such as the ribbing, the tracery, and all the ornamentation. All the masons served a long and rigorous apprenticeship. They were highly organized and mobile, traveling from town to town wherever there was work. Now under the masons served the quarrymen, the mortar mixers, and the carriers, which often included oxen. Those animals were considered so important here at Laon, by the way, that they were immortalized in stone in the towers. None of the menial laborers were treated as well as the masons, and none were paid much for their work, particularly the oxen. At one cathedral whose records still survive, workers began in the summer before 5 a.m. and continued on until 7 or 8 in the evening, a 14 or 15-hour day, with a half hour for breakfast, 1.5 hours for lunch and a short nap, they must have needed it by then, and a half hour for a late afternoon snack. In the winter, the people who managed not to be laid off only worked a 9-hour day. Around every cathedral, virtually all labor was skilled, to some degree, as well as professional and organized. There's the story of the cult of the carts from Chartres, where noble citizens were supposed to have hitched themselves to wagons to help transport building materials. It's very romantic and very moving, but very doubtful. Many other tales have come down to us about amateurs so inspired by the undertaking that they were willing to work for free. In fact, there's an epic song of the period about a pious local man who worked entirely for love, wouldn't accept any money for his labors. The other workers killed him. And there's plenty of opportunity for that at a place like this. Money for the construction project was handled by the cathedral's chapter. Here at Amiens, the chapter house actually adjoins the cathedral. The chapter hired the master builder, dispensed the payroll, kept the records, and bought materials. They appointed one of their own to be custos fabricae, or keeper of the fabric, to personally administer all these tasks and to keep the tons of supplies and materials flowing to the builders. Clearly, the most important material was stone, and chapters generally bought or started their own quarries. It was extremely difficult and expensive carting stone, so quarries were located as close to the worksite as was possible. Another crucial and expensive item was timber, especially the long, heavy beams required for the roof. But by the end of the 13th century, there weren't many trees left in northern France that could meet these requirements, so most of the wood had to be shipped in from other countries. Many of the building trades are proudly displayed in the stained glass and carvings. All in all, building a cathedral was a tremendously expensive, time-consuming, and intricate process. In fact, it still is. Forty-three individual trades are represented in the stained glass at Chartres, showing not only the integration of secular and religious life in the Middle Ages, but the tremendous pride in craftsmanship that had its prime showcase in the cathedral.
The election of Friar Roland as the new bishop is most welcome. No one has forgotten his service to the poor and the lepers. But what his grace faces is formidable. And who could be surprised after what happened under Bishop Gervais? For many months, each meeting at the chapter was an exercise in frustration. Until one day...
My Lord Canons, I have the most wondrous news to relate.
Merchant Thibault, this is highly irregular.
I beg your forgiveness, but I must tell you, while it is still fresh in my mind, just this morning, Bishop Roland told me of St. Francis of Assisi and his miraculous way with animals. Later, as I was walking through the woods north of the town, all at once, I was blinded by a great light. When I recovered my senses, I could not believe it, but there could be no doubt. My eyes beheld a vision of the Blessed Virgin, clothed in the sacred veil of Beaulieu. Upon her finger rested a small bird, which she bade fly to me. The bird lit upon my finger and spoke to me, just as to St. Francis. It told me that my great prosperity in business has conformed to a heavenly plan. My Lord Canons, I am instructed by the Blessed Virgin herself to give my fortune over to the cathedral.
Saints be praised.
Word of the miracle spread quickly, and so did its results. And Merchant Thibault retired to the service of the Franciscan hostel as a lay brother. But through his gift, the faith of the people was restored. Pledges began anew. Soon, Master Robert was overseeing a new army of workers. The damaged walls were shored up with better stone, and the debris from the fallen bays was cleared away. The nave was completed, and the splendid towers begun. Robert is most confident now, and has even begun the casting of 4 bronze bells at the Beaulieu foundry.
It is a delicate process, Your Grace. The craftsman first must make a clay and plaster model, which is then covered with a layer of wax, the desired thickness of the finished bell. The mold is covered with additional clay and plaster and heated over a fire. The melted wax runs out and leaves a cavity into which the molten bronze is poured. When the metal cools, the mold is destroyed and the bell is smoothed and tuned.
I cannot wait to hear it. Day by day, the towers rise before our eyes. The town is prospering. We are blessed with a fine bishop. We have much to be thankful for.
It is with deepest respect that I, Ansel, take quill in hand to assume the task of our brother Pierre, who departed this earth on the 4th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1267. He dedicated himself to this chronicle for more than 50 years. I hope I can prove a worthy successor. Progress has been inspiring these past years. It is thrilling to know I will see the completion of this great church, just as it must have been to see its beginning. I most enjoyed watching the carpenters finish building the great spire. It is a frame of wood covered tightly with sheets of lead, then splendidly decorated. The wind is terrifying and the height dizzying, but the view is well worth the fright. I confess to lingering more than once to gaze at the heavenly sunsets. Inside the cathedral, stonecutters and sculptors completed mouldings and capitals, while skilled masons created a maze on the floor of the nave. Finding one's way to the centre is certainly worthy of God's blessing, signifying as it does the pilgrimage journey of the pious. They came from far and wide for the dedication. My heart sang out, for I knew that the great cathedral of Beaulieu, a beacon for all the children of God, was now, at long last, complete.
If you think about it, the Gothic cathedral, or any church for that matter, was essentially built as a stage for the Mass, the greatest drama in Christian faith, the mystical play in which worshippers reenact the key event of the Last Supper and seek their own salvation through the sacrifice of Jesus. The scale of that stage may be the single thing that sets the cathedral apart. As physical setting for the Mass, the Gothic cathedral is truly awesome. Your eyes immediately travel heavenward, and you're instantly surrounded by the mystique and the promise of supernatural power. But even aside from that, you feel the presence as soon as you enter this building. There is, first of all, the light of divine illumination. The images seem to float above us in the air. That isn't just glass. That's drama. It's also an important teaching device. Keep in mind that in the Middle Ages, outside the clergy, not many people could read or write. So the cathedrals were planned to help ordinary men and women understand and appreciate their faith. Outside in stone, inside in stone and wood and glass, the cathedral is a three-dimensional picture book of religious instruction and a guide along the pathway to salvation. The cathedral reaffirmed for every pilgrim that his faith was real. It placed Christian belief safely out of the reach of uncertainty, making that belief as substantial and soaring as the cathedral itself. Cathedral art also strove to constantly link religious and secular life, to glorify kings and princes along with apostles and saints. The saints, apostles, heroes, and martyrs are portrayed as human, sensitive, and loving, and none more so than Mary herself. Most of the prominent cathedrals of this period are dedicated to Notre Dame, Our Lady. In an age of chivalry and exalted womanhood, it is as if an entire society had fallen in love. Mary is perceived as the Mother of God and as the human vessel through which God became flesh. She's therefore both of heaven and of earth, just like the cathedrals that bear her name.
So for all its structural brilliance and artistic splendor, the story of the building of a Gothic cathedral, like Chartres, where we began, is primarily one of faith. Faith in man's willingness to struggle and his ability to triumph, as well as faith in God to provide. In a world of temptation and uncertainty, the cathedral was an inspirational and permanent reminder of all that medieval man valued most. Its size and splendor assured and reassured the promise of eternal life in God's heavenly kingdom when the trials of life on earth came to an end.
Major funding for this program has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Additional funding has been provided by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by annual financial support from viewers like you.